Welcome to The Deep Dive, a special podcast edition of The Basketball Show. I'm your host, Paul Sir. I'm going to take you into new territory in your hoops journey with the best of the best in basketball experience, expertise, and analysis. The Deep Dive is brought to you by the Hoop City 3x3 Basketball Festival, featuring the top Olympic men's and women's FIBA 3x3 teams from across the world competing in the beautiful Ice Palace in West Edmonton Mall, July 31st to August 3rd. Go to 3x3ba.ca for your tournament information. Now let's take the deep dive. Welcome to the Deep Dive on the Basketball Show. I'm your host, Paul Sir. Pleased to be joined by Ben Golliver of the Washington Post. And Ben, we're pre-recording this for my Saturday show, but it's also for my podcast. And Ben, we just got the news that Tom Thibodeau has been fired by the New York Knicks. And what's your response? Was this expected or a total surprise or not that big of a surprise at all?
Well, Paul, are you telling me that Leon Rose and the Knicks ownership, they were trying to give you some good content for your shows? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's exactly what you're hearing. Absolutely.
They wanted to time it for maximum impact.
Absolutely.
We're taping this as the pink slip is still in the air, I guess, as they would say.
I wonder if Tibbs even knows.
It's interesting timing just because they just had this Eastern Conference Finals run. For the first time in 25 years, they make it that far. And so usually you don't see the coach fired at a peak moment, right? But I think with Tibbs, we've seen it time and again. He wears on people. And his style in terms of playing his starters such heavy minutes, in terms of being so stubborn and unbending with his lineup combinations, not playing young guys, not developing young players, I think it's understandable for everybody just be kind of exhausted. And then also, I think it's understandable for ownership to say, hey, we had some decent guys that he didn't play, because once he did give them opportunities in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Pacers, some of those guys had some good moments, right? So you just kind of wonder, was there a missed opportunity for New York? Could they have made the finals this year after taking care of a team like the Boston Celtics, such a good team in the second round? Did he get out coached by Rick Carlisle in the conference finals? I think those are all very valid concerns. And to me, the straw that should have broke the camel's back here, he's supposed to be a defensive-minded coach. His defense is supposed to be very formidable. It usually has been during his career. They gave up so many easy baskets in a game-deciding Game 6 against the Pacers. How many runouts and leak-out layups did guys like Pascal Siakam get in that game? And so it kind of goes back to, well, if you're the defensive-minded coach, and the defense is looking like a mess in the biggest game of the season, something's not right. Maybe we have to change directions.
Historically, there have been some coaches in the NBA who I think are fixers as opposed to developers. And maybe that's not the exact terminology that's valid, but I think way, way back to Bill Musselman, he always was brought in to right the ship and to toughen a team up. But his shelf life, using that term again, was pretty short usually. But think even back to Doug Collins and the Chicago Bulls and the success that they were starting to have before the mantle was passed over to Phil Jackson, and then all of the championships that followed, and even more recently, Ben, Mark Jackson, being let go, and Steve Kerr stepping in. And the Golden State Warriors were on an upward trajectory. This is not without precedent, in other words, in NBA history, is it?
Well, I think, it's maybe not the most politically correct phrase, but you hear that idea about like the starter wife or the starter home, right? I think that's kind of what you're getting at with some of these coaches where, you got to turn things around. You got to get a bad team and turn it into a, respectable outfit. That's what Thibodeau did. I mean, when he took over the Knicks, they hadn't been in the playoffs in 7 years. His first season, he gets them back in the playoffs. I mean, that's a quick turnaround. 2 years later, they win a series in 2023. It's the first time they won a series in a decade, right? So they clearly needed some stability and some order with that organization, and he brought that. But then obviously the goals and the talent changed while he was there. I mean, they go out and they get Jalen Brunson. They trade for Karl Anthony Towns. They make a big trade for Mikal Bridges. They make another big trade for OG Anunoby. I mean, those are big swing moves. Those are ownership in the front office saying, we need huge results for this. And I thought it was a great season for the Knicks, honestly. They were so bad during the regular season against good teams. I did not expect them to make the conference finals or beat the Celtics like they did. And I thought they showed some clear progress in terms of, just their offensive ceiling by bringing in Karl Anthony Towns. But there was some slippage defensively, and I think there was some disappointment in terms of how he used the bench and how he was able to, get the most out of Mikal Bridges. And so I think the front office and ownership group is looking at this saying, hey, we did our job. We got all the talent you could possibly want. And we think we can get a different coach, maybe with a different style, who's going to be able to take them further in the playoffs. And that's exactly what happened with Mark Jackson and Steve Kerr. And I guess I would just say I don't like the Knicks' talent that much to think that they have a championship ceiling, right? Jalen Brunson's very small guard. He's had some issues in the playoffs a number of times where his effectiveness comes down. Karl Anthony Towns can't guard anybody. Bridges just lacks the physicality of the best wings in the league, and so that's going to hold them back. So, to be honest, like, I understand if you're going to try to, change course because you need a new voice and because Tibbs is wearing on you. If you really think you're going to find a Steve Kerr to take this team to a championship, that's where I start to get kind of skeptical.
I'm with you on that, Ben. And in my notes before you and I were going to talk, and before we knew of Thibodeau's firing, I wanted to delve into briefly the rebuild in the offseason of the Minnesota Timberwolves and the New York Knicks, because clearly the Knicks are a piece or two short of that, what I would call champion pedigree, for the reasons you just described, and something you mentioned earlier. Part of the reason they didn't get back on defense, I believe, is A, fatigue, B, Indiana's superb effort and energy in Game 6. But C, they're kind of a plodding team in a lot of respects, and they need to, I think, add a couple of more athletic pieces in a couple of positions that really are going to make a big difference for them.
Well, they definitely like the slower style. I mean, that's how Brunson wants to play. You're always going to play your best player's style, right? So, but that comes with some cost too, right? Because he pounds the ball so much, it doesn't really create a lot of opportunities for those wings to have their own scoring chances, right? And so, it's not a surprise to me that somebody like Mikal Bridges gets marginalized, or OG Anunoby. Maybe he looks great some nights and he looks not so great some other nights, because those guys are not the priorities, and because the ball doesn't move. They just don't really get very many assists. And for a good offense, it's so isolation dependent. So if I was their front office and ownership group, I would be looking at a coach who could bring a little bit more of a modern attack, right? A little bit more pace, a little bit more ball movement, a little bit more share of the wealth, and to see if you can kind of create more of a whole is greater than the sum of the parts dynamic with the pieces that they have accumulated, because they're going to find it very hard to make trades now that they've loaded up with so many big salaries. They're not that they're backed into a corner, but it's just going to be more difficult.
Well, and they're not the Minnesota Timberwolves. I mean, I think they're in a position where they're going to have a real tough time making any big trades with the kind of contracts that they have. But I agree with you. You have to go with what your best player provides. But when you forego basic offensive movement almost entirely and rely just on the pounding of the ball and isolation basketball, that does have a ceiling. And I think they broke through that ceiling with a surprise win over Boston that I think would be awfully hard to duplicate going forward in the future. So it will be interesting now, not only to see who the front office picks for replacing Thibodeau, but if they make any kind of tweaks or strategic moves in the lineup itself.
Well, one good thing for the Knicks is they can look and say, well, Boston is going to be out next year because Tatum's injured, right? The
Right.
Milwaukee Bucks will probably look a lot different because Giannis is dealing with Dame Lillard's injury, and he might change teams. You could look at the Philadelphia 76ers. They're no longer a factor because of all their injury and age issues, right? So if you're the Knicks, even though you did get some good breaks against the Celtics in the second round, when you look ahead to next year, you should still feel like you're one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference. I mean, I think Indiana and Cleveland are going to be there, but the Knicks should be right there in the mix too. There's a real opportunity. There's a real window for them. And so I do think that's probably part of the motivation here too, from ownership in the front office, thinking we've assembled a lot of really good players. We stack up really well against almost everybody in the Eastern Conference. Maybe if we change coaches and find a different voice, we will be able to get over the hump and make the finals and really get people excited.
I'm talking with Ben Golliver of the Washington Post here on the Deep Dive on the Basketball Show. All right, Ben, that's a great segue into the NBA Finals are finally set. You've got OKC, a juggernaut, against Indiana. Now, here's my opening question to you. Is Indiana OKC light, or does Indiana have the talent pool and unique quality? Do they have the unique qualities that they can make a series of this with Oklahoma City?
I do kind of look at the Pacers as the JV Thunder, I'll be honest. And, going back and forth between these series a little bit, I just thought the intensity level of the games in the Western Conference and the talent level was just meaningfully higher than it was in the Eastern Conference. I don't want to take anything away from the Pacers because I think they clearly are the most deserving team from that conference. They went 12-4 through the playoffs. I mean, that's no joke. I mean, that's really taking care of business, especially when you have to beat a top seed like the Cleveland Cavaliers, and they just smacked them. So this is a good team. I just think the Thunder are better. The biggest difference to me, is on the defensive end. The Thunder are in the playoffs are about 10 points per possession better on defensive rating than the Pacers. That is a massive gulf, right? I mean, that's the difference between a close game and a blowout, basically. And the Thunder have racked up a lot of blowouts in this year's playoffs. And so I think a lot of the focus for the series will be on the Thunder defense and the Pacers offense. Can Indiana score enough against Oklahoma City to make it interesting? But I actually think the series will be decided on the other end. I think the Pacers defense is sort of the weakest link of all these four units. I think the Oklahoma City offense is excellent, especially because Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has been so consistent throughout the playoffs. And because they passed some really big tests against teams like Denver and Minnesota, and I just don't think the Pacers are going to have enough defense to hold up and slow down the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think that's where the series is going to be won. And I'll be honest, I think the Thunder defense is going to slow down Indiana too. But I do think it's the Pacers defense that's going to be the weakest link.
It's interesting. You talk about the JV, Indiana being the JV version of the Oklahoma City Thunder. I was correlating that to what was a real impressive defensive effort by Ryan Nembhard in Game 6 against the Knicks, and what he did, the effort he put in to guarding Jalen Brunson with being very, very effective. And by the way, one thing that jumped out to me, Ben, was one of the most frustrating aspects of NBA defense is the way that screens are defended 35 feet from the basket. Of a big goes out, sets a screen, and automatically there's a switch, and you got a big on a skilled offensive guard going one-on-one, where Nembhard and Lou Dort in the game against Minnesota and his guarding of Anthony Edwards, they clearly show this all comes down to effort, number one, being committed to getting over the screen. And once you're over the screen, getting help from your defensive partner who's guarding the man setting the screen, and then helping and recovering and getting back to the matchup that you want on defense. Nembhard did a great job that night. Dort did a great job on Anthony Edwards doing the same thing. It's been nice in the playoffs to actually see teams going back to what I would call old school defense.
Well, I love getting in the nitty gritty with you. I think they are calling this now screen navigation, right? The
Yes.
defenders who are able to fight over the top and stick with the guys. Now you saw the shift to the auto switches out on the perimeter when teams were going with more versatile lineups. And so the idea was like, well, we can just save everybody the wear and tear, save some energy. We'll just switch everything. And because we have a whole bunch of wings out there, we won't really be in too much trouble. But in the playoffs, of course, they're going to have the guy setting the screen be defended by the biggest, slowest player, right? They're going to bring that guy into the action. And so like you're describing, it creates a lot of very favorable opportunities if you just auto switch for the offense, because now a guy like Shai can go against a Rudy Gobert, who's going to have real trouble staying with him, 25 feet from the hoop. That's not going to end very well, right? Or in the case of the Eastern Conference, do you really want Karl Anthony Towns and his slow feet trying to guard Tyrese Halliburton? Good luck. That's not going to work out very well, right? So there is a huge advantage to avoiding the auto switch. Now, what you see from the Thunder, though, they can afford to be even more aggressive when they're fighting over those screens. Sometimes they're even like plowing through the guy who's screening. They'll take fouls in those situations because they're trying to set a tone with the officials where they'll let a lot of physical play go. And what they don't worry about is foul trouble, because if Dort gets into foul trouble, you bring in Caruso. If Caruso gets into foul trouble, you bring in Case and Wallace. All those guys are incredible perimeter defenders, right? Even Jalen Williams is a great perimeter defender for the Oklahoma City Thunder. And so they can afford to be, I don't want to call it reckless, but incredibly aggressive in those screen scenarios, fighting over the top, creating contact, sticking close to ball handlers, because they have so much depth behind them in terms of the other guys capable with those same skills. Now, the problem that we saw, say, for Minnesota, anytime McDaniels wanted to play hard on the perimeter, if he got into foul trouble, Minnesota had nobody behind him to put him in those spots. And so that's really when Shea was able to get loose. There was just nobody left to guard him. And so I think for Indiana, the challenge is, you've got Nembhard, you've got a couple guys there on the perimeter who are good perimeter defenders, but they don't have as many as Oklahoma City. And so if there's foul trouble, that's definitely going to be favoring the Thunder, because I think the Pacers, eventually they're going to run out of bodies. And I say that because, one of their players, Jarris Walker, he had an injury in Game 6, so he's not going to be available to start the series. And they've had some other just like minor injury issues on the perimeter that's holding them back a little bit. So, it's just one more advantage where like the Thunder do it great, the Pacers do it well. But I think in this case, doing it great is probably going to carry the day.
I'm gonna shine the spotlight for a moment on Lou Dort. I saw Lou Dort play twice at Arizona State his 1 year he was there. And what I left was, I also saw him when he was in high school. He actually came to Edmonton and was part of a national championship event that we were hosting. He was impressive as a youngster, just in terms of his physical strength and athleticism. When I went to Arizona State, I thought, yeah, the guy's really athletic, but man, he didn't have much of an offensive game. So I thought, I don't know, maybe he's just one of those great athletes that just quite doesn't have the skill set offensively to get to the NBA. Another brilliant observation on my part, Ben. So thank God I'm not an NBA scout because can you think of a more imposing perimeter defender over the last, say, 10 to 15 years than Lou Dort in terms of his ability to lock down the very best of the best offensive players with his defensive strength and capabilities?
I think the other guy on his team, Alex Caruso, is pretty close to him.
Yes.
I think that's a good
Yes.
comparison. I think a lot of people would look at a young Kawhi Leonard and put Lou Dort
Yes.
in that category too. Let's give some credit, though, to the Thunder shooting coaches. I think they brought in Chip England from the Spurs, if I'm not mistaken. They had to build up Lou Dort's offensive game. That's why he was overlooked by a lot of pro scouts.
Correct.
And he really struggled in his first couple of years offensively in the NBA. It's an amazing development story. The toughest moment of this postseason run, I think it was Game 5, right, against the Nuggets, where Lou Dort had 3 3-pointers in the fourth quarter. I mean, this guy he couldn't, throw the ball in the ocean a couple of years ago. And in the highest stake moment where they're getting pressured by, Nikola Jokic and the 2023 champion Nuggets, who comes through for them shooting 3-pointers? None other than Lou Dort, the guy whose entire career he's been the weakest link offensively. So an amazing player development story, great confidence. He's a longtime Thunder player. Him and Shea are sort of the old guard for that team, which is such a young team. And it's a really cool story that he's finally getting to pay the rewards, the dividends, after, all that time he's invested there in OKC.
You just mentioned a name that I just want to make a quick statement and acknowledgement of, and that's Chip England. When Kawhi Leonard arrived in San Antonio from San Diego State, similar to what you just described as Lou Dort's arrival in Oklahoma City, Kawhi Leonard could not shoot the basketball. And he, under England's guarding, or guidance rather, has turned into a very competent, very good shooter. Same with Lou Dort. Chip England, to me, is the beacon of shooting coaches. There's a lot of skill people out there, but the thing I love about Chip England is that he teaches people how to shoot because he was a shooter. He knows how to shoot. It always baffles me. It's like me taking my car to a guy who doesn't know how to, who's not a mechanic, and saying, would you fix my car? Chip England knows how to shoot. He knows what it feels like to be a shooter. And I think his ability with players who come with a very rudimentary skill set, like Kawhi, like Dort, and they evolve into, through hard work of their own, but under his guidance, become the players they are. That, to me, is demonstrative of that essential connection between a shooting coach who really knows how to shoot, really then knows how to teach players how to shoot.
No question. And I think the best shooting coaches, they kind of know how to improve your form without completely overhauling it, right?
Right.
And so that way it's comfortable for you. It's not just cookie cutter. And you see some of these guys where they get the shooting coaches and they get into their own head about it and they can't make a shot because the shooting coach wanted to change everything about what they were doing instead of trying to find the subtle tweaks. And so, Lou Dort's shot might not look anything like Kawhi Leonard's, but they both go in. That's the important part, right? And so that's to me the real master of a great shooting coach is being able. It's just like a great coach overall. It's like don't don't tailor your system to your players. Have your players dictate the system, right? And I think it's kind of a similar thing when it comes to shooting as well. Obviously, if you've got a shot that looks like Michael Kidd Gilchrist, right, you got to make it look a lot different. There are some extreme examples, but in most cases, you just got to take somebody from being a 31% shooter to a 36% shooter, and that can totally change their life, right? It can make them hundreds of millions of dollars, and I think that's really the mark of a great shooting coach. Let's also give some credit, though, to the front office philosophy, right? I mean, the Spurs were in on this early, and I think the Thunder, where Sam Presti has some Spurs ties, they've had a similar philosophy. It's the idea that you can get a really, really good player in the draft later than you would expect if that guy's flaws he can't shoot, because there's so much emphasis on shooting in the modern game. And so take an amazing athlete, take a guy with amazing work ethic like a Lou Dort, or a guy with this great body that's like perfectly made, for perimeter defense and an unbelievable motor and just a love of life. Take that guy and then teach him how to shoot, right? Don't have his development end when he gets to the NBA. Look at that as the beginning. And the Thunder have done that time and time again with a lot of different players where they've really built out their skill sets while they've been with the Thunder and sometimes with their G League team as well. And, even their coach, Mark Dagnall, used to be their G League coach. That's how seriously they take player development. So it's something that's really paid dividends to me for the Thunder is this idea of we have a philosophy going in the draft. We're going to take the best players we can find. And sometimes those guys might not be able to shoot at all, but we can fix that.
100% agreed. And just one final thought on that. Reggie Miller had one of the goofiest follow-throughs in basketball history.
Yeah.
His left hand, flinging outward as the ball was released, but it was his right hand being on the ball and his follow-through on the ball hand, why he was such an effective and great shooter. So you're right. I love that. I love that delineation between don't change everything radically, tweak it and make it better, but keep the player comfortable and confident and develop that way. So we're going to run into the stretch run because I know you're going to be out of time soon now, Ben. So we both agree that it's going to be really tough for the Indiana Pacers to win a 7-game series against the OKC Thunder. So what are you thinking, 5 or 6?
I think I'm going to take 5 for Oklahoma City. I just look at Indiana being on a very similar par with Minnesota and Denver in terms of their body of work during the regular season, right about 50 wins. Each team is different. Obviously Denver's got the best player with Jokic. I think Minnesota had the best defense of those 3 teams. Indiana's probably got the most creative offense or at least the clearest pace of those 3 teams. But I think they're all about, pretty similar. And what we saw with Oklahoma City was, their first test against Denver, there was some nerves, there was some shakiness. They're a young team. They had to kind of prove it. And then once they got that next test against Minnesota, they just aced it. I mean, they were incredible in that series. And I think Oklahoma City is gaining momentum. I think they have an incredible home court advantage. And this year during the regular season, they were 29-1 against Eastern Conference teams. The only loss was against the Cavaliers in Cleveland. So that is a huge mountain to overcome for an underdog like the Pacers. And the great part about the Pacers, they'll love being in the underdogs. They've been down and had these amazing comebacks in all three of their series against Cleveland, Milwaukee, and New York. They're not afraid to annoy people, to aggravate people. Tyrese Halliburton with the choke sign in the Garden, game one. The game's not even over. He's already doing it. So they are up to the task in terms of, not getting, I think, mentally intimidated by the scope of the challenge of beating Oklahoma City. But I think ultimately, OKC's talent, their discipline, and that incredible defense will just be too much.
I totally agree with you. The only asterisk would be there's two long shots. Number one, I think Rick Carlisle is an exceptional coach. Number two, Cleveland should have overwhelmed them theoretically. Now, there were a lot of different things. Cavaliers were not the Thunder. Cavaliers had some critical players injured during that series. So, but you can look at a team that had virtually the same record as OKC, albeit in the East, many of those games being played in the Eastern Conference, that being the difference. And you can say, all right, let's see how the teams come out, because until we see the teams on the court facing off against each other, we're not 100% sure. But I guess I would go so far as to say this is about as close to being 100% sure on the outcome. I think that's about as close as you can get.
Well, here's one way to look at it. It would be one of the biggest upsets in modern NBA history if the Pacers win this, right? But they were down 14 points in game one with 3 minutes left against the Knicks, and that had never been done before, and they pulled it off, right? So they can come into this series, and I'm sure Rick Carlisle will be pushing these buttons. He'll be saying, nobody believes in us. All the pressure's on the Thunder. If I was Rick Carlisle, I might even borrow from that Indiana movie you might have heard of called Hoosiers, right? Go out there and say, hey, the hoop is still 10 feet tall. The free throw line's still 15 feet out, right? The court's still the same size. I might be giving that speech to the Pacers because they're absolutely a team that they rally around the idea that nobody believes in them, and they were not favored against the Cavaliers. I think, in terms of the betting public, a lot of people probably bet on the Knicks to beat them just because everybody, loves the big market team. And so for the Pacers, this is kind of right where they want to be. No pressure. Let's just kind of crank up the offense and see if you can get it going. I just think for them, the challenge is going to be that Knicks defense was just not very good. There were some real weak links. Karl Anthony Towns, Jalen Brunson, they could attack those guys and have a lot of success, create a lot of 3-point shots by attacking those guys. And there just are not weak links on the Thunder defensively. Every single player on that team can guard. And I think it's going to be a real rude awakening for Indiana's offense going from the Knicks to the Thunder.
So well put. But I am excited about the finals for one reason. Well, there's many reasons. It's been it's been one of the more enjoyable playoffs that I've watched for a long time, Ben, in terms of the effort, the energy, the strategy, the fact that the mid-range game has come back into being relevant, all of those things. But I love the fact that you've got two small market teams battling it out for the NBA championship. The age of parity is here, and the way these teams have built their rosters compared to, the old school, just sign the big names, get your big three, and build around them. There's a new way forward. So there's all kinds of reasons, I think, to be excited about this NBA Finals.
No question. Here's how much I love it, Paul. I decided to drive from Indianapolis to Oklahoma City for game one because I really wanted to soak it in. If we're going to have the small market, they call it flyover country every once in a while. If that's going to be the tone for this series, I said, well, I might as well go experience the whole thing for myself. So it's been great. I can't wait for this series. And I think, either way, you get an incredible upset by the Pacers, or I think you get a coronation of one of the better teams we've seen in recent memory. I think if the Thunder win this thing, they will have been the best champion for me watching since probably the 2018 Warriors. And there's a lot of good teams since then. So that would be no small praise. So they got to finish the job. Obviously, 4 more wins to get there. But either way, you're looking at massive upset, or you're looking at kind of a coronation of a really, really good team and one with a super bright future.
Absolutely. And by the way, I'm glad you made that drive because, you live in California, and when you drive in California, you're by the ocean, you're in the mountains. We all know what you guys live with. But Midwesterners like me, or when I drive to Minnesota through Saskatchewan and North Dakota, you have to learn to appreciate the subtle beauty, plus the historical sites that you stopped at along the way. They're pretty darn special, but driving through the heartland is something special.
Oh, no question about it. And, Lake of the Ozarks here in Missouri, or I saw Mammoth Cave down in Kentucky. I mean, what a blessing to be able to do that right before watching basketball at the very highest level. So I can't wait. It's been an awesome week, a nice little refresh here before the series. And then we get to Cowboy country and we get to watch Oklahoma City and see what they can do in front of that home crowd.
Absolutely. Ben Golliver, Washington Post, thanks so much for making the time. Enjoy the finals, and I look forward to when we can catch up again.
Okay, I'm sure we'll talk soon, Paul. Take care, man.
All right. Ben Golliver, Washington Post, joining me on the Deep Dive on the Basketball Show. Thank you for joining me for this special edition of the Basketball Show's Deep Dive. You can listen to the Basketball Show live every Saturday from 10 a.m. to noon Mountain Time on Sports 1440 in Edmonton and sports1440.ca all across Canada. Our podcasts are available on all of your favorite podcast providers. Watch for my blog, 3 from Deep, on my website, 3x3ba.ca. The Deep Dive has been brought to you by the Hoop City 3x3 Basketball Festival, July 31st to August 3rd in the Ice Palace in West Edmonton Mall. I'm your host, Paul Sir. Have a great week on and off the court.